Well, good evening. This is Mike Tillers. I'm at the Tea Party. Tonight we're going to be talking about Joe McCarthy.
Mason County, Victory Township. I'm on the steering committee here for the Manistee Tea Party, and your other leader, Bob. Dear Lord, as we gather for this meeting, give us the use of your gifts of peace and understanding, that we may approach the matters we must handle with sincere and just hearts. May you watch over and guide our discussions and actions as we work for the betterment of our community, our state, our country. Keep us always true to the principles on which the United States was founded. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our speaker this evening is Matt Sheck, and I'll read a little bit of his bio so you have a little background on Matt. He grew up and was raised and graduated from Garden City High School, joined the United States Marine Corps in 1963, returned to Michigan from Vietnam in 1966, graduated from Schoolcraft College. He's married with 3 grown children. He joined the John Birch Society upon his release from the Corps in 1967. He has been a member of the Society and a chapter leader for 50 years. The John Birch Society motto, strategy, and method of operation are all important to him. It was the denigration of Senator Joe McCarthy in one of his college classes that confirmed to him the interest in why America was losing to communist advances around the world, and that could only be answered with a summation: it was designed that way. It was a discovering knowledge of history relative to the fall of China, Southeast Asia, and the contribution of that fall by his own country that led him to search out just how that happened. So Matt's going to be talking about Russian involvement in our elections and the internal affairs in our country. Matt?
Thank you, everyone. Glory to God in the highest.
Amen.
I'd like to just start with a short little poem, maybe to set the tone. No man is safe when freedom fails. The best men rot in filthy jails. They that cry, appease, appease, are hung by those they tried to please. I've always liked that because it kind of highlights human nature. People that want security and safety over maintaining their freedom, which is what we used to be taught in school, that liberty is maintained by constant vigilance. Not just the military that's vigilant, but citizens have to be vigilant as well. Okay, first of all, maybe I should start out by saying I got my interest in Joe McCarthy because I remember seeing him when I was 11 years old on television. And I was very fortunate. I grew up in a family that religion and politics was commanded to be spoken at the kitchen table. So it was with the shepherding of my parents that the kids got to watch Joe McCarthy on television, and at that it was the Army McCarthy hearings in 1954 that were televised, and people got to see what was going on. And unfortunately, there were a lot of people that were also planting a lot of erroneous ideas about the intent and the object that Joe McCarthy was doing. This isn't the first time I spoke in Manistee. I've been here twice before. One time I spoke in front of the county commission. And I know that they were considering putting the peace pole, which I think they eventually did put up. Most communities put up a peace pole. And like in Traverse City, when I spoke at a county commission meeting, they're opposing that. It was also that the so-called peace groups that were planting peace poles, they were also planting in people's minds with literature they were distributing, calling for an end to SDI. Remember SDI? Strategic Defense Initiative? Only they didn't call it that. They called it Star Wars. I mean, you have to vilify. We're living in a day and age, if you don't like something, you really need to vilify it, okay? So anyway, somebody from Manistee contacted me, a gentleman by the name of Tex Collins. I don't know if anybody knows him. I hear people laughing. Yeah, Tex was kind of a wild, crazy guy. But he liked what I said. In fact, what I did, he gave me that picture of Joe McCarthy that's on the table over there. And that little inset picture is Tex Collins and his wife, and Joe McCarthy and his wife. And Tex lived that period of time, and I really enjoyed talking with him. I imagine that he passed on, because he'd probably be over 100 years old, but still probably filled with as much piss and vinegar and water as he was back then. But I enjoyed Tex because he was a real person, you know, and he didn't hold anything back. Anyway, you know, the other time I think what spawned off of that was somebody from the American Legion had me come over and do a talk on my perspective on peace, and I told them, and that's still going around today. In Traverse City, there is a left-wing veterans group that is presenting to the city commission application for them to join International Cities of Peace, sponsored by the United Nations, naturally. So I've already done my job trying to explain to the Human Rights Commission. We had to explain to the Human Rights Commission why it was a bad idea to have sanctuary cities. Get the idea? Our country has got a new mindset out there. But back in the 50s, people were concerned. I was going to bring it in, but in my car parked out in the parking lot, I have I think it's an 18-inch record that was cut at WJR on, I want to say June 9th, 1950. And it was a radio interview with a man by the name of Louis Budens. Probably doesn't ring a bell with any of you people here, but Louis Budens was the editor of the Daily Worker at one point in time until he defected. And it's interesting that he came, the day after that, he came to Traverse City, and he's sponsored by, what's that, the Catholic organization, Knights of Columbus. And he spoke at the Central Grade School Auditorium. That's over 1,000 seats. It was packed with people, according to Terry Lazan, who gave me that record because her and her husband were members of the Catholic organization. And they really liked Louis Budens. Louis Budens left the Communist Party, told all about what was going on, but he wasn't the only one. There were 3 other people, and this is prior to Joe McCarthy. So Americans were starting to hear some things that was very unsettling to them. Probably the most important one, besides Joe McCarthy, that I was familiar with, and I read her testimonies, was Elizabeth Bentley. Elizabeth Bentley was a high-ranking courier for the Communist Party of America. And let me explain Communist Party of America. I've known people in college, and you guys probably do too, or in schools or wherever you went, that they probably told you, yeah, okay, we have the Communist Party of America, but it's different than the Russian Communist Party. There's no connection, they don't get along. You know, the Communist Party in Russia, they don't get along with the Chinese. Folks, that ain't true. And how do I know that? Well, there was a couple of very significant events before I get into Joe McCarthy, I need to tell you about. Actually, it's almost like telling you the end of the story. One of them was, and I made extra copies of this over there, anybody that wants to take that. But this was in the Detroit Free Press, February 25th, 1989. And it titled this, "Now the Truth Can Be Told. Watergate reporter Carl Bernstein is bringing out a book called Loyalties about his crypto-communist parents were victims of Joe McCarthy. Mr. Bernstein's father urged him not to do the book. You're going to prove McCarthy right, Al Bernstein warned, because all he said was the system was loaded with communists, and he was right." That's right from communist mouth. But there was another, this was in 1989, there was an even more significant event that happened. It was released in 1995. We don't know exactly when they broke the code, but it's called the Venona Decrypt Papers. The Venona, from mid-1930s until into the 50s, our intelligence had intercepted broadcasts from the Russian embassy back to the Soviet Union, but it was encrypted. They were never able to break the code. They couldn't break it because it was double encrypted. But eventually they figured that out, and they did break the code. And the Venona Decrypt Papers detailed the people that Joe McCarthy was naming as, well, he actually never named anyone communists. He wanted them to come in and testify and tell about it. But the Venona papers showed these people, even gave their code names that they were using at the time, okay? Big name people. Many of them were in the United States State Department. You know, the State Department is in charge of a lot of things. You know, they set the stage for treaties, they set the stage for future actions of our own government. And I want to explain to you in the next 20 minutes or so why that was so important and the tragic events for dissing an honorable senator like Senator Joe McCarthy and believing people that were either communist sympathizers or they were playing politics. They didn't want it to happen on their watch, Democrats and Republicans. But I thought that would be important for you guys to know that. I apologize for telling you the end of the story, so to speak. But this is a story that's ongoing. I mean, you see Russia in the news today, and that terrible President Trump and the collusion with the Russians. Terrible, right? Where in the hell were they 60 years ago? No, they were protecting those people that were betraying our country, not just our country, folks. Imagine this. I kind of tipped my hand here when saying about the State Department. You realize that there were so many communists working within our government, State Department, and in the office of the President of the United States. Rockland Curie was the close advisor to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Rockland Curie was a communist. Leo Adler was a communist. These were high-ranking State Department people feeding information. We were simultaneously feeding information, bad information, from communists in the field, like the IPR, Institute for Pacific Relations, and an organization called Amerasia. It was a magazine put up by the communists, high-ranking communists, that not only did the magazine, but they also were working in our government. They had like trap doors they could get into our government. Sometimes it was in the Department of Agriculture, but once they get in, they had people in there that could promote them into other agencies. I mean, it was like mice in a cheese factory. You had all kinds of access. So, one thing that did happen, and a lot of what I'm telling you was like the confluence of history. Prior to Joe McCarthy, a lot of the stuff that Joe McCarthy did was already out there. There was something called the Lee List that security people in the State Department were concerned about. You know, they had independent security. They were concerned about it, so they would do these reports. The FBI would do reports. They send it in, nobody was doing anything about it. The Lee list that actually names the same people that Joe McCarthy started focusing in on when he got involved in 1950. Now imagine this. Joe McCarthy started his crusade, if you want to call it that, on February 9th, 1950. It was done in Wheeling, West Virginia at a Republican Women's Club meeting at the McClure Hotel, 7 p.m. Joe McCarthy left that evening, and then for the next 3 days he went to Denver, Colorado, Reno, Nevada, and one other city that, but it was like the heartland. That so incensed the sitting senators because, number one, Joe McCarthy was a junior senator. He had just been elected in 1946. For 4 years, he hadn't done any of this. But he picked up on what other senators decided it was going to be too controversial, too political. You know, let the communists come in under the Republicans, but us Democrats, we don't want to get the bad image here that we're friendly. But remember the words of Eleanor Roosevelt, and I had an English teacher in college that told me this. She said, everybody in those days had friends that were communists. Eleanor Roosevelt was no different. She's the one that said, some of our best friends are communists. And so why was that? Well, World War II. That's what did it. There was I talked about a peace organization here, but there was a peace organization, let me see if I can remember what that one was. The American Peace Mobilization, okay? The American Peace Mobilization existed in 1939. Significant year, right? The war is about ready to start. In fact, for England, it already started. The American Peace Mobilization is a communist front group, was a communist front group. And if you guys never heard of a communist front group before, I'm not sure. Sometimes you have to tell people that there are groups out there that have started by communists, but it's really staffed by people that aren't. It gives them plausible deniability. It allows them to do things way beyond their influence if they were strictly all communists. The American Peace Mobilization picketed the White House at that time in defense of not getting involved in World War II. Remember, a big significant event happened in Europe at that time. Nazi Germany and Communist Russia had attacked Poland. They were allies. Interesting. A lot of people aren't even aware of that. They don't teach things like this. Russia was the only country in World War II that fought on both sides of World War II. But they won't teach that in school. There's some deeper ramifications of that. When Russia occupied their part of Poland, one of the very first things they did, they are insidiously evil. They always think of the future. They took their officer corps of the Poles that they had captured, 17,000 of them. This was in wintertime. Marched them out into the Katyn Forest. Those of you who know anything about the Katyn Forest, you know who's buried there? 17,000 Polish officers. They killed them, shot them, murdered them. They denied it all the way up into the 60s until it was proven. The only thing is, you know what they were shot with? They were shot with German ammunition, because during, the explanation of it is this, is that it's from the exhumed bodies, they were able to tell these were German bullets. And Germany, when Hitler and Stalin had their pact, had traded ammunition and weapons to the Soviets, and the Soviets were, I guess you could say, evil enough, smart enough, to shoot them with somebody else's gun. You know, that takes coordinated planning. Man, this is how history can get manipulated like crazy. So, the war is going on. What happened then when, just a few months after that, when Hitler did attack the Soviet Union? The American Peace Mobilization changed its name to the American People's Mobilization, and they switched sides, or then they condemned fascist Germany. Before that, they were defenders of it. In fact, there were people, FDR even had spoken out kindly of Mussolini I mean, it's hard to believe these things, but those of you that are pro-life realize that Margaret Sanger had Dr. Ernst Rudin, who had also been in the German army, a doctor, and right in Birth Control Review, which was controlled by Planned Parenthood. So a lot of the left has got you talk about skeletons in a closet. My God, I mean, if people really wanted to focus in on that, you know, the idiots that tear down statues down in, well, wherever they're not only in Virginia, but wherever they go today, they won't focus in on that. They know history. They know that they have an objective, and it's to color the name of your target and destroy them. All right. So they're our allies. So what did that mean? Well, number one, it meant that as allies, we would incorporate them into our fight against the Nazis. And that's what happened. You guys know what the OSS is, or was? Office of Strategic Services. It was a forerunner of the CIA. And when Bill Donovan, General Donovan, was told that, you know, hey, General Donovan, you have some communists in the OSS. His response was, I know there's communists there because I put them there. They were our allies. All the safeguards that we had before, and we did have good committees prior to that. We had the DICE committee, HUAC, I think CIS started later, but the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee. All of them are gone. House Un-American Activities, they're all gone today. We don't have any protections anymore like we used to have. Because they use and they pillage Joe McCarthy to the point that you don't want another Joe McCarthy, do we? No, we don't. So the media is actually also another helping hand. What do they call the media? Is that the fourth estate or the fifth column, you know, for the enemy? They are certainly playing that out today. I mean, CNN, I'm surprised it's still alive. It's been such a fake news organization. But the media, like back when the Army McCarthy hearings and Joe McCarthy was also having hearings, and incidentally, Joe McCarthy never named anyone. What he did was he had cases and he had numbers assigned to names. And that's important because in the Senator Tidings from Maryland hated Joe McCarthy, hated him with a passion. And they baited, when Joe McCarthy got back from, you know, that opening salvo where he traveled 4 cities besides Wheeling, West Virginia, they requested and they basically forced Joe McCarthy to go to the Tidings Committee. And it was to they said to investigate where the communists are at. It wasn't anything like that at all. It was to get Joe McCarthy, to trap him with words, to accuse him. Joe McCarthy tried to explain to them, and he was interrupted in a 6-hour period over 200 times when he was giving his testimony to the Tidings Committee. So the Tidings Committee, fortunately, I guess I can tell you this. Senator Tidings only lasted, that was in 1950, only lasted 2 more years because in the general election in 1952, Tidings was voted out of office. Joe McCarthy was still in, and Joe McCarthy then had a committee of his own. Before that, he was operating he was a minority party. So, other people within our government were contacting Joe McCarthy. It wasn't just people that were concerned about the State Department. The FBI was suspected of leaking information to Joe McCarthy, and they are not supposed to do that, so that would be a big faux pas for the FBI to do anything like that. Out of that also came, let's see, where was that at? New Jersey. It's an Army base, I want to say, a lot of research, scientific research, things like that. Atomic bomb thing. Somebody from there, a couple people said, we're very concerned here because we do not trust our security system. In fact, upon checking, they found some of the information that had been at almost said the name, begins with M. I want to say Monteith, but never mind. Some of the information that was leaked out of there wound up in North Korea's hands. So they know that there's been a big breach. Communists are working. Communists were taking stuff home. Nobody's checking on anybody or anything. And it all goes back to the idea that, hey, they were our allies in World War II. You know, the Navy aboard, not the Navy, but the, oh gosh, it's like the Navy, what do they call that? The what? Merchant Marine, there we go. Communists were forbidden to be part of anything to do with Merchant Marine, but they changed that requirement. They could work, and they could work in communication, where they could have access to a lot of codes, which they did too. I mean, America was like going backwards and heading downhill very, very rapidly. The media, though, true to form, the media at the home front was doing its part. You guys remember Edward R. Murrow? Yeah, Edward R. Murrow would constantly belittle the junior senator from Wisconsin. And Joe McCarthy took it all in. There were other people in the media, writers and people like that were really lining up against Joe McCarthy. He didn't have a friendly voice. Oh, he did have some friendly voices in the media, but then those people were attacked and tried to silence them. So you can't have, you know, any kind of opposition in the media. If you want to understand that better, if anybody here is into poetry like I am, Rudyard Kipling has an excellent poem describing what the media is. It's called The Gods of the Copybook Headings. And it's a dynamite revelation. It's like a tongue-in-cheek look at the media of his day. Rudyard Kipling would know because he was poet laureate of England. I believe he did some time as an editor in India. And so he knew the power of the press. And so, where do we go from here? You guys can ask me any kind of question, but I want to point out something. This is jumping ahead a little bit here, but on the table over there, you guys probably didn't know it, but the John Birch Society got its start in 1958. The same year Joe McCarthy died, but before Joe McCarthy died, there's a picture right here. Joe McCarthy sitting next to Robert Welch, who was the founder of the John Birch Society. And what, I guess I'll take a little side venue. I love rabbit holes, don't you? The John Birch Society got its start because they realized something had happened. China went communist. It never should have gone communist. But it was the revelation that there was a young army captain that was killed by the Chinese communists after World War II had just ended. Within days after its ending in China, Captain John Birch, out in the field with a couple other people, Welch worked intelligence. Captain John Birch worked in intelligence. His job during the war was, since his parents were Baptist missionaries, he grew up in China, he knew the language. When he came back and got his divinity degree, he was going to go back, and then the war started, so he went into Army intelligence, brought me up to date on that. But his job was like, remember Jimmy Doolittle, when Jimmy Doolittle and his flyers, they bombed Japan, and then they couldn't come back to the ship because it was too far, so their job was just to fly into China as far as they could and then bail out, because planes run out of gas. And John Birch worked on the ground, locating these people, and brought Jimmy Doolittle out. But it was the premeditated murder of Captain John Birch by the Chinese communists, and then a subsequent cover-up by the State Department of that fact that Robert Welch formed an organization after John Birch. So, all right, but back to the betrayal. My interest in it is this. I was in Vietnam. I remember reading at that time some statements that Joe McCarthy had made about when he was trying to convince the Republicans, especially the Eisenhower people, is that, guys, we had to do something about China because well, I'm sorry, I said Eisenhower, it was the Truman people. China goes, we're going to be in Southeast Asia within a decade. Talk about a prophetic statement. He knew. We all heard it. You know, I remember hearing it when I went to Vietnam. It was the domino theory. The media loves to put, you know, names on things like that just so that they can maybe tear it apart. There would be no domino theory. There's no such thing as collusion between communist countries. We're all at each other's throat, etc. It isn't. Socialism is the enemy of everybody. Margaret Thatcher even said that, you know, socialism fails when it runs out of other people's money. It's not a productive system. It's a system of control. Very, very bad control. Anyway, I did have something I was going to read, and if you guys have any questions, I'll open it up. There's just so much I could tell you about Joe McCarthy. But I think it's important to understand that there were so many different cells. I already said that Elizabeth Bentley named 2 of them. She said there was at least 4 communist cells working in our government. 2 of them have never been found out. There were so many communist infiltrations into other governments. It's amazing. The Sorge spy ring, he didn't operate in this country, but he was a German, but he had Asian field. The Sorge spy ring had spies in the Comintang. The Comintang was General Chiang Kai-shek's, he was the head of the nationalist Chinese, not the communists. General Chiang Kai-shek was fighting the communists. He was also fighting the Japanese. He was the only one that was doing that. The communist forces under Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong avoided any kind of conflict because they knew that the war would be over and they wanted to maintain their strength. You know, you don't fight the Japanese, you lose people and have casualties. And yet those Adler and the people that were out there in the field, and especially also, a lot of people won't know this, but there were 2 members of the Sorge spy ring that were Japanese, and they were privy to the inner council of the Emperor of Japan. They had spies everywhere. Our own government, their government, our friends' government. All the while this is going on. Remember, England was having trouble too. England had trouble with a particular spy that was defended at home, said he's a good guy, and then the guy takes a vacation, and where does he go? He goes to Russia and becomes a colonel. I mean, England was just as stupid as the United States. They put it that way, but that's the way it worked out. So, what happens next in all of this? Well, they were trying to bring up charges on Joe McCarthy, and they realized that it would have to be through some type of censure. He's in the Senate, that's the only way you can do it, you've got to try to shut him down. The media, Joe McCarthy, he kind of reminds me of Donald Trump, you know? He just focused on it. In fact, it was J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, he says, you have to really understand Joe McCarthy. There's 3 things that you need to understand about Joe McCarthy. He was a pugilist in college. He was a fighter, all right? He was a Marine, and he was Irish. God bless the Irish. That's what J. Edgar Hoover said about it. I imagine those 2 could really tell some stories of what was going on. Lots of wiretaps. The United States really came through it. Well, we didn't really come through it. We suffered that because they were really successful. Because as the war was ending, China was the nationalist Chinese were denied the right to still maintain their fight The United States was withdrawing support from the nationalist Chinese purposely because of the reports that were coming in from those infiltrated communists that Chiang Kai-shek was not a good, effective leader or fighter, things like that. And so General, the head of our army at one time, now took over the State Department, went to China. Actually, he made a statement that said, with a stroke of a pen, I disarmed 26 I disarmed 26 Chinese divisions. With another stroke of a pen, I armed 26 communist divisions. We were disarming the good guy. Some people were saying that, hey, let Mao Zedong settle it, they'll break these. Mao Zedong was sold in this country as what? An agrarian reformer. Same agrarian reformer that they said of Castro, or any communist that takes over. The media does things like that. Oh, they're just agrarian reformers. Castro was the Robin Hood of the Sierra Maestra. Wonderful. The media disarms us intellectually, giving us bogus information. I am so happy that today we have words like fake news out there, because people start to question. But I'll tell you this, not everything is fake and not everything on the internet is true either. You have to be very judicious in what you read. Try to find at least 2 sources. I already gave away my New American magazine, but in the Birch Society we have a magazine called The New American. You guys can look online, you can read some of the past issues. It's dynamite in a world that's going crazy. All right, any questions today, Mike? Yes?
If everybody used the mic, then we can all hear it. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Yesterday, I was in a doctor's office, and I ran across a magazine called The Smithsonian, and I was amazed at how much history it was in that. And I'm just wondering, do you have any suggestions on good sources of our true history? Because, we're all realizing that magazines like Newsweek and, they're just full of disinformation. So, do you have any recommendations?
Well, I already gave you one. It was called The New American magazine. And they do have, in the back part of it, they have a history session on there. I mean, it's not just current history or history in the last 50 years, but one time they had somebody, I think it was Ed, has an interest in the Black Robe Regiment. I first found out about the Black Robe Regiment by reading New American magazine. Black Robe Regiment was in the Revolutionary War. There were ministers that gave their Sunday sermon with their black robes on, but they took the black robe off, and underneath was the green uniform of the Continental Army, and they led people out to fight for freedom. They were called Black Robe Regiment.
The Mackinac Center and the Heritage Foundation, too, are good sources of information.
Yes.
And there might even be some history in there also. Here's another question.
Hi, Matt. I'm Ted Aarons. I served in the Marine Corps in Vietnam for the domino theory on the DMZ, and heard about the domino theory. I got a couple of questions. First one is, what do you think about Russia today? Because I think Putin has declared himself a Christian nation, the only one in Europe, from what I understand. And the Bolsheviks killed many, many people.
Oh.
And in fact, they killed a lot of Ukrainians, Christian people. And I don't know if people realize it, but the leadership that I've read is 70% of the leadership of the Bolsheviks were Jewish. Trotsky, Lenin, a whole bunch of them. And nobody ever has heard hardly ever of the Holodomor. I don't know if you have or not. But it's the guy by the name of Yendrik Yagada was in charge of the gulags in Russia, Yagoda was his name. And it's interesting that that England went to war because Germany attacked Poland, but they never went to war against Russia. And Russia attacked Poland. So, and the newspapers, for a long time. Today they are 96% that I've read controlled by individuals. So that strain runs through there. You know, the American conservative guy named Pat Horace and Bill Kristol, that's on TV all the time. They all come from that lineage of Russia. They were, you know, that sect that was out there. So
Yeah.
interested in your answers. And I just want to mention one other thing for all the people here. You know, I'm a big veterans supporter. The Israelis attacked the USS Liberty in 1967, June 8th. I'm an honorary USS Liberty crew member. And I've written many articles in the paper. I've talked to many senators and congressmen. When Trump gave his speech and the widow from Seal Owens was in the audience, the whole Congress stands up. They all applaud her, the Supreme Court, chiefs of staff. You go to one congressman, not a single one will support these men. They've been fighting for 50 years to get a fair hearing. So, interested in your comments. Thank you.
All right, well, first of all, I want to say welcome home and Semper Fi. Our country hasn't always done the right thing, obviously. But McCarthy's story really highlights that because people will, I believe, honest people in the core of who they are, the good people, will do the right thing. Unless they're misled. I cannot help it. It just blows my mind to think that the betrayal of the Free Chinese and the fall of China, how different would the world be today if we helped the good guys? We wouldn't have had a Vietnam. There would be 60 million Chinese more alive today because Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution, you know, they did what a lot of the Antifa people today really want to do. If you doubt that, you ought to look up Larry Grathwold's explanation. He was in the Communist Party in our day, when we were younger, and he tells about attending meetings in Chicago with a lot of professors coming in from other universities. He says it blew his mind to have college professors, you know, 100 or so, sitting around talking about the logistics of those people that wouldn't be able to transition to the new way, you know, the new order, the logistics of eliminating 15 million American lives. Talk about Pol Pot, you know, he did what, a couple million? Khmer Rouge, yeah, 5 million, yeah. I was being conservative.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Unless somebody else does. The media's, I think we're finally starting to expose the media for what they've been doing to our country for the last 100 years. What has been the effect of talk radio on exposing the communist threat and also the media's role in the communist threat to our country?
Well, I think it's almost nil because I think that's like dead airspace today. I mean, they'll talk about communists today, but they kind of separate it from what the reality of the 50s were. That's why I focus in on the 50s. If you could see the 50s of what they really were, but there were some good things that came out. People were starting to wake up. Before that, for me as a John Bircher, I used to think, well, it's the communists, they're just coming in. So there was a gentleman, you guys know the name, I'm sure, and I know you know the book, A Miracle That Changed the World, 5,000-Year Lead, by Cleon Skousen. Skousen did 2 other books. One of them was called The Communist Conspiracy, but I really recommend the other book he wrote called The Capitalist Conspiracy. The Capitalist Conspiracy is actually it's a book about a book. It's about Professor Carroll Quigley's book that he wrote in 1966. It's a history book. Quigley taught at Georgetown University. Quigley considered himself an inside man. He says in his book that he talked about there is an Eastern Seaboard establishment that a lot of people aren't aware of that make decisions that are far beyond what you and I know today. And he gave them credit. The only thing that he disliked about them is that they wished to remain secret. He said, I believe that their influence in the world is great enough that they should step forward and lead us into this new system of what they have in plan, because he's all for it as well. I thought, this is an amazing admission. The book is called Tragedy and Hope. And you can go online and you can Google Democratic National Convention 1992, and you'll see Bill Clinton giving his acceptance speech and says, and I'd like to give credit to my mentor at college, Professor Carroll Quigley. So I just thought, things that tie together, and I know I'm talking conspiracy here, but you know what, folks? Evil people do evil things, and they need to be exposed. And they've been getting away with murder on a massive scale, all because they have a better plan for our lives. I think we ought to quit hiding and saying it's happened by accident, and there's two views of history: the accidental view, and then there's the conspiratorial view. And I don't know how. I'll go to the next question.
Okay. Are you talking about the deep state? Are you talking about the deep state? Deep state.
Oh, deep state, yes. Some people call it that. I'd prefer to call it Council of Foreign Relations.
What do you think of people like Saul Alinsky, that Obama was involved with his teacher, and Soros and people like that?
Yeah, they exist. Sometimes though, I think we get a little into conspiracy, and then you got to be careful, because then it can go off into lots of things. Like in Traverse City, I'm just one of the members of Traverse Bay 912, but we have a couple people there. They want to go into, well, the planes really didn't hit the World Trade Center, because this video came out on thing. It was a photographic imposition. I'm thinking, give me a break. False conspiracies are used to cover up real conspiracies. And so I try not to go there. I'm just trying right now just to give history. History is bad enough. History is, man.
Here's a question here.
Yes.
Well, I know the Iron Curtain fell, Berlin Wall's with us no more, so communists can't possibly have any threat to us today. I'm wondering what you can tell us about November the 4th.
Well, from only what I've read, that the Antifa people are threatening to disrupt our country. Now you can see that they've been successful in doing some things, not just in Wisconsin where they shut down freeways, but Los Angeles, of course, Charlottesville. They are master manipulators. So I would expect maybe something that could happen. When I was in the Marine Corps, I was always amazed that when we were attacked, I was at Marble Mountain. It was a helicopter. I was in communications. So when we were attacked, also the base at Chu Lai and then down at Phu Bai were being hit at the same time. They just do tactics that make it look like they are much more coordinated and much larger than they are. That's Sun Tzu's tactics. When you're weak, you feign that you're strong. Because if they were strong, they could try just to overrun us. They could have the weapons and tanks and everything like that. They didn't have that. They won the battle because we were not allowed to win the battle. That's the way I like to tell people. It's called rules of engagement. Damnable rules of engagement. Your friends, my friends' lives are lost because somebody decided that they couldn't do this. Can you imagine rules of engagement in World War II? No.
Here's a question.
Matt mentioned two things, one asked by Doug, of the Antifa group. And November 4th, they made a declaration not too long ago that on November 4th, they were either going to attack we the people, our government, or whatever. And we don't know if that they mean an armed attack or if they mean just a disruption, but these are the people that are dressed in black and they got body armor. And we've seen them on the news. They've been all over. They're real. And also, I mean, they're a domestic terrorist group. Also, there is another group that people should be aware of called the Redneck Revolt. Now, we had an experience, myself and Doug had an experience with them in Kalkaska a few months ago, where there was a protest and a counter-protest to against the president of Kalkaska because he had a large pro-Trump sign up on his building. And shortly after both sides kind of got together, this Redneck Revolt group showed up. And maybe Matt might have that on the film there, but they were armed. But they were fully armed, AK-47s, AR-15s, and they were open carry.
They're communists.
And they are, yes, a communist organization. And the same with the Antifa, which is an anti-fascist group. Now, they named November 4th as their date of action because that is the 100-year anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution. So we'll see if anything comes of that, but it'll be kind of interesting.
Yeah, the left is famous for using anniversary dates for things like this, so it is quite possible.
Yeah, I got one more comment. The books that Matt mentioned with Cleon Shulskin.
Skousen.
Excuse me.
Skousen.
Skousen, okay. He was a retired FBI agent, and he was charged with ferreting out the communists in our government. Among those books, he wrote one called The Naked Communist in 1958. And you can buy it on Amazon. And if you read it, within that book, there's a few pages of probably 50 or 60 line items that if the communists could achieve them, they would take over our country. And when you read them, which this was written in 58, when you read them today and see how many they have achieved, it's quite startling. Yeah.
I want to thank you, Ed. You corrected me.
Oh.
You don't even know it.
Oh.
I gave Skousen credit for writing the book, The Capitalist Conspiracy. It is the naked capitalist and the naked
Communist. I had the book. I read it a couple times.
Yes, it is an excellent book. If you could get anything, I'd say get that book. Yes.
This book, Tragedy and Hope. Tragedy and Hope is at least 3 inches thick. It is extremely hard to get. They've restricted publication. I got a copy out of Saginaw, and I found it extremely hard reading because this guy was a professor and he would go on and on. But the book is 3 inches thick, and they only allowed me to have it for 2 weeks. Then I had to turn it back in. I did not get very far in the book, but I wanted to say to you, it's almost impossible to get.
Thank you for saying that. I recommend getting the Crypt book, which is The Naked Capitalist. It goes into and explains it, pulls out those phrases and those points that he makes in that book. This is what we call still power? Good. Anyway, lost my train.
That's okay. In regards to books, the Madison Area Tea Party has a library. We used to bring them and we used to stack them along the table, though we got tired of hauling 20, 30 books here every meeting. So if anybody would like a list of the books, I'm sure I could, or my wife could, or one of the steering committee members would be happy to provide you with a list of the books, and you can check them out and read them and just bring them back to the club when you're done reading them.
Speaking of, I'm sorry,
Do we have Do we have, to your knowledge today, anybody that will stand up like McCarthy?
Yeah,
Well,
I,
but someone who's active outside of the,
Acted outside of the immediate government.
well, we have some, I believe we have some that are in our Congress and in our Senate. So, you want a name? It rhymes with Rand Paul for one of them.
okay, got it.
That's one thing the Birch Society does also. Every quarter, they go through every vote that was done in the previous quarter, and they have something called a Freedom Index. And you can look online and you can find out how your congressman voted. I just chewed my congressman out because he only got a 60% in the first quarter, Jack Bergman. And it's based on this. If they're voting on something and there is no authority in Article 1, Section 8, which is your delegated powers of Congress, they shouldn't be voting on it, whether it's a money thing or anything. They should just vote no on it. Do not vote for it because you do not have the authority. Somebody has estimated that 80% of the bills that Congress is running through, there is no authority in the Constitution. The greatest power is us that's informed. When we know our own Constitution, so we can tell our congressman, you don't have the authority for that, it's not in there. But you see, there's some congressmen that they know how to play it. They say, we're the Congress, we can't do anything. That's obviously that you're doing it, and that's why we're in such a flipping mess today. Can I have another question?
One more question.
I was going to touch a book here in a minute.
I just wanted to say amen. One of the things that, I'm retired military, and one of the things that I used to do was gripe about our government. And somebody pointed out to me, our government is full of people, and that we need to start instead of calling it just a huge government, we need to start looking more tightly at individuals and holding them accountable. When you said Jack Bergman only got a 60%, I thought he was supposed to be quite conservative. Was he just basically talking out of both sides of his mouth, or because my representative is Bill Huizenga, and if you're familiar with him, he regularly gets an F from people like Conservative Review, and so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. 60% was, the majority of the Republicans got 60%. There was one Republican that got 95%.
Were you friends?
Justin Amash.
That's what I
It's
was going to
Justin
say.
Amash, right?
I was going to bet you that was Justin Amash.
You don't like Trump, though.
Well,
Tax cut or changing it.
hey, some of that goes with the territory.
Yeah, well,
You know what? No, it's like this. All right, if you don't like Amash, you tell him why you don't like it, but make it constitutional. It's the same way with Trump. What we've been doing for so long is that we get our guy in, and everything he does, well, he's our guy. So we kind of like hold back, the constructive criticism. No, you should be able to tell him, Donald, you've done good so far, but please don't bring back that Paris Accord on climate change. That is terrible. So, and he's been tending to go that way. So. And he needs to get rid of some of the Council of Foreign Relations people that are on his cabinet. General McGregor, -- 1.
Yep. They take you.
Are there any other questions?
Is it the John Bird Society or the William Bird Society?
John.
Okay.
Oh.
Birch. B-I-R-C-H. Birch.
John Birch, like in Birch Street.
Okay.
That's why one of my pins that I have on, besides the Vietnam campaign ribbon that I wear, is a gold birch leaf. That's secret communications when you go into a room, it's like a handshake.
What's your suggestions for, us lay people as far as, doing what we can do to expose the problems we're having with communist infiltration? Got any ideas? I know it's kind of a heavy question.
Well, the first thing is always organize. But you have to also, the Birch Society has a motto. It's education is our total strategy, truth is our only weapon. So education, but in order to educate other people, you need to be educated yourself. And my friend Ted here, who just happens to have a number of New American magazines, I guess that means, Ted, that we can, anybody that wants one, or you're selling?
What I do is, of course, I have a membership, but when they come out something like Get Out of the United Nations, it's all featured in there. It's all featured, and I will go and buy, I'm a membership, I can go and buy like 10 books for $20, maybe 25 with shipping. But then I hand them out to the people in our GOP there in Lindsay County. And they're come out every 2 weeks. So you're always ready. We just had, you talking about the communists? That was just a few months ago they had that. Spells out the whole thing, even pictures of the people signing or going for the United Nations to organize it. And 2 out of the 3 people were communists. And then in '53, they had an investigation, the Senate did, and the guy that headed it after the thing was over said, I cannot believe it, the head of the United Nations is all communist. And they were actually former high-paid U.S. People in our government before they went into the United Nations. They were on our payroll. We were paying them. And that's why they want to take over. And this thing, I think, has a lot to do with Korea right now.
Article on Korea in here. It mentions in here that back in the Clinton administration, they loosened the requirements, and with the blessing of the United Nations, the United States gave North Korea 2 light water nuclear reactors. And it's like, wait a minute, this is the same guy that's exploding hydrogen bombs today, and we're all going to be upset? It's like, who was it? The mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel. He said, crises are a terrible thing to waste. Government is in a crises production line, okay? They create crises. Let me just, I want to close with something. Well, I don't even have to close, but I want to read you something, because this is kind of important to understanding the left, the communist left, and the communists themselves, because they use language sometimes that's disarming. Remember this, peace to a communist means no resistance to communism. That's in the Communist English Dictionary. Here's a statement that came out that when, you guys remember the SDS, Students for a Democratic Society? They were a communist organization. They changed their name to the Weather Underground. So in 1962, SDS focused on acceptance of communism and should not fear it, they said. And on reasoning, anti-communism has become a major social problem for those who want to construct a more democratic